notice, Job never laments when he's reflecting on his losses. He never laments that he lost his stuff. It's not what he's lamenting. He laments that he lost his peace. Now that's significant, I think, for some very specific reasons. He never asks, why have I lost everything? Never. What he says is, why have you left me? The perceived loss of God in his suffering was in Job's mind his greatest loss. Job chapter 29, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Job chapter 29, verses 2 through 5. Job chapter 29, 2 through 5. It says that Job, this is in the context of Job and his friends going back and forth, and now it's Job's turn to talk. In verse 2, he says, "Oh, that I were as in the months of old, as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone upon my head, and by his light I walked through darkness, as I was in my prime, when the friendship of God was upon my tent, when the Almighty was yet with me, when my children were all around me." He's remembering when life was good. In those verses, when God was caring and close, when he was surrounded by the fun and the laughter of his children, his house was full. He was remembering when life was good, when God seemed near, when God seemed close and caring. And he's expressing the same kind of depression there that overtook the psalmist in Psalm 88, verse 14, where he says, "O Lord, why do you cast my soul away? Why do you hide your face from me?" That's what Job's saying, essentially, in chapter 29. A huge part of Job's suffering is that God seems so distant. God seems so absent from the pain that Job is experiencing. Job was feeling what the Puritans used to call God's dreadful withdrawal. Those seasons of life where God seems far away, where he seems detached, uncaring. Job felt alone in his pain. He felt alone in his ache. He felt alone in this world. Do you ever feel like God has forgotten about you? Like he doesn't care about your trouble, like he's against you, not for you? I have felt that way, and I know lots of people who have felt that way, and that is the way Job felt. Okay, now listen very carefully. Concluding that God has forgotten about you, when we conclude, okay, we're suffering something painful. We're experiencing a dark night of the soul. We're experiencing what we perceive to be God's dreadful withdrawal. Suffering has come to our front door and has invaded our living space. And as a result, we conclude that God has forgotten about us, that he doesn't care about our trouble. When we conclude that God has forgotten about us, that he doesn't care about our trouble, it assumes that relieving us is the only way for God to show you that he cares. Okay, now think about that for a second. That is huge. When we find ourselves, as I often do, find myself questioning God's care and concern for me because life is falling apart. Things are hard. What happened? You not care? Whenever we experience something difficult, pain, suffering, trouble, whatever the case may be, and as a result we conclude that God doesn't care about us, we are assuming that the only way for God to show that he cares is to relieve us of that pain. But what if God not relieving you right now is proof of his care? What if God is working for you in ways that you can't see? And he's doing things for you that you can't feel. The Southern novelist Flannery O'Connor once said beautifully, "Tragedy is strangely capable of returning my characters to reality and preparing them to accept their moment of grace." The moments when I have felt closest to God are the moments when I've needed him the most. The moments when I have felt strong and self-sufficient are the times I've felt furthest from God because I don't think I need him. Those times when I have felt God's presence the most are those times when I have felt the weakest, when I have failed, when I've been flat on my back. C.S. Lewis speaks to this when he says, God whispers to us in our pleasures, but he shouts to us in our pains. We see more of God when life is hard than when life is good and easy. We see more of God's goodness, more of God's faithfulness, more of God's provision for our lives and giving us everything we need when things are hard, when we're flat on our back. Remember, I told you last week that when we get to the end of Job, Job says, having suffered everything that he has suffered, he says, my ears had heard of you, O God, but now my eyes have seen you. And I said that the road from knowing about God to knowing God, from hearing to seeing, is paved in suffering. It's paved in loss. There is simply no other way to be set free from our innate sense of self-sufficiency than to lose. And we think losing is the great enemy. It's not. We think failure is the great enemy. It's not. It's typically in losing and in failure that we see God and are set free from this exhausting sense of self-sufficiency that we've been cultivating our entire lives. Live long enough, suffer enough, lose enough, and the idealism of youth fades in favor of a robust realism that helps you see I am far weaker than I ever thought I was, but God is far stronger than I ever hoped for or imagined. Suffering has a way of revealing to us that we can't make it on our own, that we need help. Suffering reminds us how not in control we are, how little power we have, and how much we need God. Suffering has a way of stripping away all our resources so that in the end, all we have is the only thing that ultimately matters, the love and approval of God.